nonpolar covalent bonds. So basically, first we're going to study what are covalent bonds. Covalent bonds are the bonds formed between two atoms by the mutual sharing of electrons. So, what type of atoms are these? These are the atoms which are basically the atoms of nonmetals. That means that the covalent bonds are formed between two nonmetals. What are nonmetals? Nonmetals are the elements that are electronegative and they have the tendency to gain electrons. So when the two atoms of nonmetals, any nonmetals, they form a bond between them to stabilize themselves by completing their octets, this bond is called covalent bond. For example, if we consider two nonmetals, hydrogen and chlorine. We know that hydrogen has 1 electron in its outermost shell while chlorine has 7. So these two form a covalent bond between them by the mutual sharing of electrons. In covalent bond, there is not a complete transfer of electron from one atom to the other, but instead the atoms share their electrons. In this case, the hydrogen atom shares its 1 electron with the chlorine, and in return chlorine shares 1 of its electrons with the hydrogen. In this way, the octet of both the atoms is complete. While in this case, there is an exception that hydrogen's octet is basically the duplet. So when hydrogen has 2 electrons in its outermost shell, it becomes stable. And when chlorine has 8 electrons, that means the octet is complete, then it becomes stable. So we had a brief interview of the covalent bonds, so let's move to our topic, that are the polar and nonpolar covalent bonds. So we'll start from polar covalent bonds. What is a polar covalent bond? Polar covalent bond means the bond formed between two heteroatoms, dissimilar atoms. If a covalent bond is formed between two dissimilar atoms, heteroatoms, then the bond pair of electrons will not be attracted equally by both the atoms. Such type of bond is called a polar covalent bond. So in this definition, you have heard heteroatoms. What are heteroatoms? Heteroatoms means two dissimilar atoms, means the atoms of two different elements. Like if we consider the same example as previous, hydrogen and chlorine. So these are two dissimilar atoms, means atoms of two different elements. Hydrogen atom and the chlorine atom. As I had shown earlier, then this would be a polar covalent bond. The bond formed between two heteroatoms. Okay, in this bond, basically why we call it as polar? We call it as polar because there is a difference of electronegativity between the two covalently bonded atoms, as a result of which this bond pair, which I am showing with the blue, this is attracted unequally by both the atoms because one of the atoms is electronegative while the other becomes electropositive. Why? We know that every atom has some electronegativity value. We know that the electronegativity value of hydrogen is less than that of chlorine. As a result, the more electronegative atom attracts the shared pair of electrons more strongly as compared to the other atom. So it will develop a partial negative charge and an automatically created partial positive charge on hydrogen appears. Why? Because there is unequal sharing of electrons, and these, what I have written, these are the delta signs that indicate the partial positive and partial negative charge is created due to the unequal sharing of shared pair or the bonded pair between the two electrons. So, how can you tell which atom is more electropositive or which is more electronegative and which is the electropositive? We know that electronegativity has its trends in the periodic table. Electronegativity values increase as we move from left to right in the periodic table, while it decreases as we move from top to bottom in a group. So as hydrogen is considered in the first group, although it's not an alkali metal, but we can consider it in the first group, and where chlorine is in the 17th group. So as chlorine is almost at the rightmost position while hydrogen is at the start, so chlorine is more electronegative. Here, the value of electronegativity of hydrogen is just 2.2, while of chlorine is 3.2. So the electronegativity difference between the two atoms becomes equal to 1. There is an electronegativity difference, which tells that there is polarity in the bond. I hope the concept of polarity, a polar covalent bond, is clear to you. Moving towards the non-polar covalent bond. It is the bond formed between two similar atoms, homoatoms. If a covalent bond is formed between two similar atoms, then the shared pair of electrons is attracted by both the atoms equally. Such type of bond is called a non-polar covalent bond or a pure covalent bond. We also call it as a pure covalent bond. In this case, we have heard the word homoatoms, which are the similar atoms. These are the atoms of the same elements. For example, if we consider two nitrogen atoms, as in nitrogen gas, it is in the diatomic form, and the oxygen gas, and as well as the fluorine gas. So these are two homoatoms, which means the atoms of the same element. When these form a bond between them, the covalent bond between these two, then there will be equal sharing of electron pair between two covalently bonded atoms. I have put here 3 covalent bonds. This is so because nitrogen has 5 electrons in its valence shell, so each of the 3 are shared between the 2 nitrogen atoms. We usually represent one of them as the dot and other as a cross. So 2 electrons form one bond pair, so one will be this, other this, and this. So nitrogen forms a triple covalent bond. That is something which we're not discussing right now, but you should know. Okay? So this was it. Now let's discuss our polar covalent bond. So these are basically the 2 same type of atoms. So their electronegativity difference will be equal to 0 because both will have the same values. So when they will have the same values, there will be equal sharing of electron pairs because no one is more electronegative to attract the shared pair of electrons more towards itself. As a result, equal sharing of electrons and no creation of dipoles or any positive or negative charges. So these are called non-polar covalent bonds. I hope the lecture is clear to you. If you have any queries, ask us in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel. Keep watching Wise Pals.